The hour of 1 o'clock having arrived, we will reconvene the Ethics Committee meeting. Our next order here is the complainants, Representative Engen and Schultz, have 30 minutes for your presentation, and then Representative Falconer will have 30 minutes for his presentation. There'll be 15 minutes of member questions, and then for anyone that's here, after that time, the room will be cleared and the Ethics Committee will go into executive session at that point. So with that, Representative Engen, Representative Schultz, if you could present the case here.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard today. I'm here to present a narrow ethics question grounded in statute and House rules. I'm not asking this committee to evaluate policy positions, motives, or political advocacy. I'm asking the committee to determine whether the documented conduct in the record is consistent with Minnesota Statute 3.084 and House Rule 6.10. I would like to read Statute 3.084 before I proceed, which is the lobbying activities prohibited. So subdivision 1 definition, as used in this section, lobbying means engaging in activities that would require an individual to register as a lobbyist, as defined in section 10A.01 subdivision 21. Prohibition. A sitting member of the legislature is prohibited from accepting employment with or otherwise receiving compensation for services performed from 1. A business whose primary source of revenue is derived from lobbying, government relations, or government affairs services. 2. A business whose primary source of revenue is derived from facilitating government relations or government affairs services between two third parties, or any other business that employs or contracts with lobbyists, government relations, or government affairs professionals if the member's job duties include acting in that capacity or providing direct or indirect consulting, advice, or administrative support for that work. And finally, this prohibition applies regardless of the location where the work of the business is substantially conducted or its clients are located. The House of Representatives and the Senate must adopt rules to enforce this section. So I'll now proceed in 4 parts: the rule, the facts in the record, how those facts intersect with the rule, and finally, what I'm asking the committee to decide. The rule. Minnesota Statute 3.084 is clear in its purpose and scope. It prohibits a sitting legislator from accepting employment or compensation from a business engaged in lobbying or government relations activities if the legislator's duties include acting in that capacity or providing direct or indirect consulting, advice, or support. The statute further makes clear that this prohibition applies regardless of where the governmental body being lobbied is located. State versus federal jurisdiction does not change the analysis. Conduct does, not labels. House Rule 6.1 gives this committee authority to address conduct that violates House rules, accepted norms of House behavior, betrays the public trust, or tends to bring the House into dishonor or disrepute. Again, without any requirement of proving criminal intent. 2, the record evidence. The record before the committee reflects the following undisputed points. First, Representative Alex Falconer was a sitting member of this body at all relevant times. Second, Representative Falconer disclosed paid employment with the Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness, an advocacy organization. Public organizational materials and websites describe his role not merely as advisory, but as a federal government relations manager. That title has a common and ordinary meaning. It denotes direct engagement with government officials to influence public policy and outcomes. Third, in 2024, Representative Falconer was registered as a lobbyist for that same organization and filed reports affirmatively stating that he attempted to influence legislative action. While that registration was later terminated, the statute does not make legality depend on current registration status. It depends on conduct that constitutes lobbying or government relations activity. Fourth, while employed by this advocacy organization, Representative Falconer chief authored and advanced multiple bills that the same organization actively supported and lobbied for, according to the organization's own materials and sign-on letters. The record reflects a pattern of close alignment between paid advocacy priorities and legislative activity. Finally, and most directly, the record includes an April 15, 2026 email sent by Representative Falconer to multiple United States Senate offices. And I want to make mention, too, that email was sent after a formal ethics complaint had been filed. In that communication, Representative Falconer, 1, identified himself explicitly as Minnesota State Representative. 2, urged a specific vote outcome on pending federal legislation. 3, stated that he was leading legislative efforts on the issue. And 4, offered to engage directly with Senate staff or senators to discuss the matter further. This email is not passive commentary. It is targeted outreach to government officials urging a particular legislative action, paired with an offer of continued engagement. It matches almost exactly the role publicly attributed to Representative Falconer by his employer. The statute that we've previously mentioned, Statute 3.084, does not ask this committee to decide whether Representative Falconer supports environmental protection, nor whether such advocacy is popular or justified. It asks a narrower question. May a sitting legislator accept compensation for performing government relations or lobbying functions directly or indirectly while serving in office? The record shows paid employment with an advocacy group, a role publicly defined as government relations, prior acknowledged lobbying activity, legislative actions aligned with the employer's lobbying efforts, and contemporaneous outreach to federal officials urging legislative action while invoking legislative authority. Taken together, these facts raise a serious and reasonable question about whether the statutory prohibition has been respected. This is not about a single email or a single bill. It is about a role overlap, simultaneously functioning as a legislator and a compensated government relations advocate. I'm not asking this committee to draw conclusions about intent, good faith, or character. Reasonable people may disagree on policy. That is not the issue. I'm asking the committee to determine whether the conduct reflected in the record is consistent with the letter and spirit of Minnesota Statute 3.084 and the ethical standards and public trust obligations articulated in our House rules to bring about this ethics committee. If the statutes just have meaning, it must apply when the role of legislator and paid government advocate are blurred in practice, not only when labels are used formally. In closing, I respectfully ask the committee to apply the statute and House rules to the facts as documented, and to determine whether corrective action or guidance is warranted to preserve the integrity of this situation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative Igo. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I will only add in support of Representative Igo's explanation here, and in specific to mention, which is in reference to our specific complaint before you, the direct actions that were taken, and highlight for the record that it's clear that there's a picture here where there's a point where we're looking at a situation where his employment with Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness could be a direct payment for his work that he has taken action on in his letter presented to the committee. And so the Save the Boundary Waters Coalition is a coalition underneath the purview and in coordination with Northeast Minnesotans for Wilderness. And with that before the body, it's an open question as to whether his actions as a legislator are being directly paid for by his employer. And that is the question before this committee, which is why we're here today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Representative Schultz. So we will now go to questions. 15. Oh, we probably should hear from Representative Falconer first. That would be good. That'd be good. I apologize for that, Representative Falconer. Okay, respondent, Representative Falconer, you and council, if you have council, have 30 minutes for presentation. I apologize for that. Who would like to start?
I will. Thank you, Chair.
Representative.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you for coming today. I'm sorry that we're here, but we'll go through the process. I'm actually going to start and let Attorney David Zoll here start out, and I'll speak in a little bit.
Please state your name for the record.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. David Zoll of the law firm Lockridge, Grindle, Nowen, appearing today on behalf of Representative Falconer. The complaint before this committee should be dismissed. It alleges that, with scant evidence, that Representative Falconer violated House Rule 910 by receiving compensation for lobbying while serving in the legislature. I want to be clear, that's the violation alleged in the complaint. That's the rule that's cited. And that rule simply says you may not receive compensation for lobbying. Representative Falconer is not a lobbyist. He's not required to register as a lobbyist under the provisions of Minnesota Statute Chapter 10A. You will hear from him regarding his role with Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness and understand why it is that he has not violated any rules or norms of this body in engaging in his work on behalf of that organization. Even a cursory investigation would have recognized that he's not a lobbyist. He's not registered as a lobbyist in Minnesota, nor federally. This reveals, in a sense, there's no basis for the complaint. But moreover, even if Representative Falconer were a federal lobbyist, and he's not, the complaint would fail because the prohibition on lobbying activities applies to state activity. And again, if you read the language of 3.084 more broadly, as I heard complainants suggest you should, you'll hear from Representative Falconer as to why his work with Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness on behalf of the Save the Boundary Waters campaign is completely consistent with the expectations established in Minnesota law. The complaint also alleges more generally that Representative Falconer violated House Rule 610 by authoring legislation that is supported by the campaign to save the boundary waters. But let's be clear about something. That legislation is supported by numerous organizations. If we look at the bills addressing the protection of wild rice in the state of Minnesota, you have organizations, over 50 organizations, in addition to the campaign to save the boundary waters, that signed on in support of enacting legislation intended to protect Minnesota's wild rice. He's not here as a legislator to carry the water for the campaign to save the boundary waters or any other organization. He's here to represent the voters who elected him from District 49A, who understand his deep personal connection to the boundary waters. He campaigned on this issue. It was front and center in his campaign. The voters of District 49A knew who they were electing, and they knew that they were electing an advocate that would come before this body and advocate for the protection of the boundary waters. And that's what he did. He's not, again, here carrying out some directive from some other organization. He's here doing the work of advocating for something that has been important to him throughout his entire life. He authored the legislation that's addressed in the complaints because those are the issues he campaigned on, the issues the voters elected to him to address. He does not bring dishonor upon this body by authoring this legislation. He is doing what voters expect legislators to do. They campaign. They tell you who they are. They tell you who they believe in, what they believe in, and what matters most. And when you're elected, voters expect you to come to the legislature and to advance efforts to do what you promised to do on the campaign trail. In this case, it's protecting the boundary waters and protecting Minnesota's natural resources and environment. That's precisely what he did. This is not dishonorable conduct. It is standing that on its head. This is honorable. This is what legislators are expected to do. And we should be clear about what complainants' assertions would mean for Minnesota. If you read the complaint and what they have to say about the prohibitions in 610 and how that applies to advancing legislation. This is a citizen legislature where members bring their personal and professional expertise to serve the people of Minnesota. Teachers advance legislation relating to education. Farmers advance legislation relating to ag policy. Hunters and fishermen advance legislation supporting game and wildlife regulations, and nurses advance legislation on health care. Not because it benefits them personally. It's because that is the area that they're passionate about, that they have the knowledge, that they have the experience and expertise to come and do the work on behalf of the state of Minnesota. If you take the position stated in the complaint to its logical conclusion, heck, you don't even have to get to its logical conclusion. You only have to go as far as the complaint itself. Representative Warwas would not be able to advance legislation addressing mining policy or benefits, unemployment benefits for miners like himself, because it relates to his profession. It relates to his employer. His employer might like the mining regulations that he's advancing. Certainly, other miners, including himself, might appreciate the opportunity to have greater unemployment benefits. If what we hear is that you can't do anything that relates to your own personal interest or the interest of your employer, this body would shut down, because voters expect people to bring that personal experience to the legislature when they do their work. Similarly, Rep. Steyer would not be able to advance legislation that provides funding for public safety agencies. Of course, he should be able to do that. He's a police chief. He knows what the demands and needs are on law enforcement agencies in Scott County, Carver County, and across the state of Minnesota. We expect that people with knowledge and expertise bring that to this body and advance that work here. We should also acknowledge that this complaint does not arise in a vacuum. It was not filed with this committee in 2025 when Rep. Falconer first introduced the legislation that's raised in the complaint or conducted hearings relating to two of the bills that are referenced in the complaint. Instead, it was hastily assembled in the hours after the complaints against Representatives Engen and Hudson were announced. This is not coincidental. It was intended to distract rather than raise serious concerns, allegations against Representative Falconer's conduct. And it's precisely because this meritless complaint questions Representative Falconer's integrity, his reputation, his ethics. It's precisely because that is what this complaint is attacking that it's important that the committee to hear from Representative Falconer himself. You will hear from him and you will understand his commitment to protecting Minnesota's environment and his commitment to serving the residents of District 49A. And he can tell you exactly what the ordinary Minnesotans who elected him to the legislature think about his work on these issues. And with that, I'll turn it over to my client, Representative Falconer.
Representative Falconer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for being here. I was elected in November 2024 to represent the residents of Minnetonka and Eden Prairie in District 49A, and I take that honor and privilege seriously. And when I won with a little more than 20% margin, I was given the mandate by my district to work on the values I presented and issues I promised, which, as stated in the response brief, I literally did campaign with a canoe on my car. So anybody that's like, oh, what is he going to do? It was evident. Protecting the boundary wires was the top 3 issue, if not the top issue amongst everything else I campaigned on. The voters know my employment background. They know I intended to bring the experience and expertise gained to be their voice in this building. To the best of my ability, I've been working every day to serve my community in the ways that I said I would, living up to the promises, including protecting the boundary waters from America's most toxic industry. I work as ethically as I do passionately. I have the utmost respect for the Minnesota House and this committee. And to be honest, my immediate reaction was that I wanted to file retaliatory ethics complaints of my own, but I chose not to because we don't need to escalate the division amongst members. More than one Republican member has actually come up to me, thanked me for my restraint in not escalating matters, and with one saying, no action around here goes without a reaction. Guess you're it. If the same restrictions that they are trying to impose on me applied to all members of the House, like Mr. Zoll said, the work of this body would grind to a halt. And that's kind of I really do feel like that's the benefit of the Minnesota State Legislature. We are citizen legislators, and we bring our own experience, our job, our life experience, and perspectives here. But since my outside employment is being scrutinized, I just want to take a moment here to explain what the organization is that I work for, the nature of my work, and how I've used an abundance of caution to avoid ethics violations both with my work at NMW and in the legislature. I'll start with NMW and how it intersects with the coalition branded as the Campaign to Save the Boundary Waters. So back in 2015, that's when my work began. with NMW. After then, the leaseholder, Duluth Metals, leases had expired, and Antofagasta bought the company for $79 million and was going through the process of then trying to get the leases renewed. There was a window of time where these discretionary leases could be denied renewal, but a lot of work had to go into it to prove that case. That's when NMW started the campaign to save the Boundary Waters, which now is represented by over 400 businesses, organizations, associations, working at every angle we can think of to protect our wilderness. I was drawn to this work out of pure personal passion and as a lifetime of wilderness travels. My first trip as an infant with my grandpa, I don't even remember. And I love more than anything that we were able to just bring our kids and my wife's parents last summer on a 3-generation trip. This place means more to me than anyone can fathom, and it is my life's work to protect the Boundary Waters on behalf of the clear majority of Minnesotans and an even more of a majority of my constituents. I'm working for my children, and should I be lucky enough for my grandchildren someday. I'm working for Minnesotans and tribes, for tribal members who live in my district, but whose ancestral lands are now at risk. Working for hunters and anglers, for the small Maine businesses in Ely and Grand Marais, for Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, church groups, school groups across Minnesota and the country, and I'm working for everyone who values the integrity of our public lands. NMW, as the organization that I work for, has many facets to it besides leading the campaign to save the Boundary Waters. A quick summary of other things that NMW works on: water quality science and monitoring. They're actually suing the Minnesota DNR, regional economic revitalization efforts and community support work. They work with the United States Forest Service on endangered species, invasive species, prescribed burns, forest management plans. They work with disadvantaged communities, veterans, schools, churches, scouts, getting them into the wilderness. Give presentations to community groups on a variety of topics. I myself, as an employee of MW, have taught a class on how to chase and photograph the northern lights, and another about the border route and Kakakaba hiking trails in the wilderness. I've worked with NMW for more than a decade, and my job may be hard to distill down to one title, but it touches on all of the above and more, also including fundraising, communications, staff development, technology purchases, and more. I've held 6 different titles throughout the years as our staffing grew and main responsibilities kind of shifted around. So we've established that. That's the overall work of NMW. A lot of things going on there. And as I stated, NMW leads the coalition brand as the Campaign to Save the Boundary Waters. And this is a common practice that for organizations that work on a multiple of issues. An example being Sierra Club runs the Beyond Coal campaign. One could work for Beyond Coal, but their paycheck comes from the Sierra Club. Similar here. One could be seen as publicly branded as working for the Campaign to Save the Boundary Waters, but they're officially employees of NMW. My role with Campaign to Save the Boundary Waters, I think, could best be served as senior advisor. My institutional knowledge of every aspect of the organization lends itself to, in every which direction. We don't have a typical corporate structure of you do this, you do that, siloed walls and departments. With some exceptions, everyone does a little bit of most everything. My main day-to-day is staff leadership guidance, overall strategy and planning, and a lot of cross-organizational and community education and information sharing. So it's hard to pin down exactly what my job description is. Every day is different, but one thing is clear: I'm not a lobbyist. Did I used to be? Sure. But as has been outlined, that registration was terminated. I am no longer a lobbyist. The transition, now transitioning my legislative work here with things that NMW supports. Start with the wild rice. I mean, I brought the wild rice bills because tribal members through Rise and Repair Coalition came to me about this and asked me to do it, not NMW. Constituents through Interfaith Power and Light also asked me to do so. Tribal members who live in my district asked me to do so. And I've been harvesting rice for years. It's another thing I care deeply about, and so I was more than happy to take it on. NMW, to my knowledge, has done nothing more than sign the letter along with 50 or so other organizations. And honestly, I didn't even know they signed the letter until it was included in this complaint. NMW has had no role in my decision to work on the wild rice bills. On the Boundary Waters issues, even if I didn't work for NMW, I would have fought tooth and nail, or maybe use a different phrase, I would have fought paddle and canoe to be the author of the Boundary Waters Protection Bill. It's my absolute passion. It's a legacy I carry from my grandfather, and I'll pass it on to my kids, and as long as I'm able. This issue comes to me from a lifetime of passion and experience and is informed by the past decade of my professional life. Just as teachers and principals here frequently legislate or vote on education matters, law enforcement officers legislate or vote on public safety matters, insurance brokers legislate on insurance matters. Again, none of those examples are an ethical problem, and I don't believe mine is either. It's actually what makes this place work best for the people of Minnesota, and it's how I plan to continue legislating should voters agree that I should return next year. And just something echoed from earlier, when my kids Google my name, I just want them to know that I fought for what I believe in. And when my ethics were questioned, I want them to know and to see that I didn't back down or abandon my closely held beliefs. So with that, I'll return time to my attorney.
Thank you, and I'll just briefly conclude because you heard from Representative Falconer, and I don't need to repeat his statements nor my own. We ask that the committee dismiss, or I guess if we follow the procedural rules, find that there's no probable cause that there was any violation of Minnesota House ethics rules because there is no support for those allegations. Representative Falconer has acted consistently with the expectations of voters, with the expectations of this body, and with the expectation of the rules adopted by the Minnesota House. He is doing, as I've said, and I know I said I wouldn't repeat myself, but this is worth remembering. He's doing precisely what the voters of District 49A elected him to do. He's advocating for protection of Minnesota's environment generally and the Boundary Waters Canoe area specifically. And he's doing that not because anyone asked him to. Let me correct that. Not because anyone other than the voters of District 49A asked him to. He's doing it because these are issues he cares about deeply. And for these reasons, we respectfully request that the committee find that there's no probable cause of a violation of House ethics rules. Thank you.
I guess I want to clarify something on one of the exhibits here from the Minnesota Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board, Appendix 2. We see that you filed as a lobbyist 1/1 of 24. When we were removed from lobbying, what date?
I think the report says by the end of the year. I don't remember when it is that I specifically submitted it, but the complainants also acknowledged that my lobbying had been terminated as of the end of 2024. So well before I was sworn in as a lawmaker.
Okay, let's go to member questions. Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Chair Davids. Thank you, Representative Falconer. Some of the questions may be a little repetitive from what you said, but I want to clarify a few things. So first, how long have you served in the legislature?
Falconer.
No, thank you, Chair. I was just elected. This is my first term, so 15 months.
Thank you, Chair. Representative, and is it correct you stated you started your employment with Northeastern Minnesotans for Wilderness, and we'll just go with the NMW, in 2015?
Yeah, and
Falconer?
Yeah, yes, thank you. And please refer to it as NMW. It's a very long name. Yeah, 2015, beginning of 2015 is when I started with NMW.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair. And Representative, are you still being paid by them?
Representative Falconer.
I'm on, while I serve in the legislature, I'm on a leave of absence. So when the session is over and I'll take a little bit of a break to breathe, then I will return to working there. So I'm currently off the books.
Representative Myers.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And Representative Falconer, what are your job duties? I know you talked about it a little bit, and I know it's not going to be all-inclusive, but if you could kind of restate that.
Yeah.
Representative Falconer.
Yep, sorry. Thank you, Chair. My job duties are, this is funny. I knew I was going to have to respond to this, and even so, it's still kind of hard. It's very all-encompassing. There's a lot of staff development work. I've been working with the campaign now for more than a decade. Every detail with regards to saltwater copper mining and its impact to the boundary waters is lodged firmly in my head and it will never leave. And so a lot of staff training, a lot of organizational and community support. I mean, so NMW and I guess the Campaign to Save the Boundary Waters has over 400 members, and they come from all over the country. For example, the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. So one of my duties at one point was to go to Park City, Utah, and meet with them and tell them about the boundary waters and why it needs to be protected. So there's a lot of cross-organizational work and information sharing and education, and also learning. If they're working on similar issues in other parts of the country and something worked here, didn't work there, it's a shared community of allies. I think that's probably day to day more in line with what I do. But like I said, there's so much. I mean, I've done some of the water quality science. I do some of the fundraising. I do some of the communications. I'm the one that purchases the organization's laptops. Lucky me. So I do kind of a lot.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair. And so do your job responsibilities change when you're in session versus when you're not in session at the legislature?
Representative Falconer.
Just for clarification, in session meaning like gavel in, out?
Representative Myers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Representative Falconer.
No job duties. Because I'm a legislator right now.
Representative Myers.
So, thank you, Chair. So, for the record, between when legislation is going on, you don't do anything once, or the legislative session is going on. After that time is when your job duties kick back in.
Representative Falconer.
That's correct.
Okay.
Representative Myers.
So, thank you, Chair. So we talked, previous here about the view of the public, what the public's thinking, the view of what other advocate groups, what other lobbyists, organizations down here are thinking. And so a question I would have for you is, did you ever consider not being the chief author of some of these bills because of who you were employed with and how that would look to the public or other people that work down here?
Representative Falconer.
Thank you, Chair. I did consider it. We've had other authors before, but given this moment in time, the wilderness needs somebody who's leading this bill that can be the absolute expert. And I'm incredibly confident that there's nobody in this body that knows more about saltwater copper mining's negative impacts to water quality and what it would do to the boundary waters. And so it was imperative to me to live out the mission of my life's passion, to be the author of the bill. Sure, I could have been, a co-author, but then in the fantastical scenario of this session that we would have gotten a hearing, I wouldn't have been the one necessarily presenting. It would have, there's a structured process. The author does most of the work, most of the legwork, and so that's what I intend and want to do on this bill.
Representative Myers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Falconer. And then also a similar question. So we had an email here dated October 15th coming from you with a lot of signatures, and this email went out after the ethics complaint. Again, maybe how the public and other people look at this. Was there any thought in your mind to maybe not be the person that would spearhead this?
Yep, thank you. Just to correct the record, it was April 15th.
Sorry.
I believe you said October 15th, which stuck out to me because my wife's birthday. Anyway, no. To author the letter took somebody that would know just so much. Things move so quickly. I found that I'm just able to write what was needed to be done. I've also, before working for NMW, coalition building and organizing was what I worked in, and it's one of the things I do. And so reaching out to other colleagues in both the House and the other chamber to sign on the bill is just a natural part of what I wanted to do. And I just felt it as part of the overall mission that I should be the one as the bill author to then also write that letter and request supportive signatures.
Representative Myers?
Thank you, Chair. And more of just maybe a statement. I know we try not to get into much of intent and why people are doing things. And for the record, I believe it was that your attorney, sorry, I can't remember your last name, but talked about the retaliatory nature of this complaint. Are you guys aware of a news article that came out April 6, 2026 that was written about a potential conflict of interest?
To the attorney?
Chair Davids, Representative Myers, I am not aware of any such article, and it certainly was not included in any of the materials provided to this committee.
Okay. Representative Myers?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I want to make sure that, we're talking about motives sometimes and things, and I think there's other things that have happened. So to say specifically why people are doing things, we're trying to deal with some of the factual evidence that's put in front of us. I think right now, I think that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Representative Myers. Representative Claiborne?
Thank you, Chair Davids. I just have a few questions. I want to make sure that I understood and heard you correctly. So during the legislative session, you were on leave.
Mm-hmm.
And did I hear you say you received no compensation?
Representative Falconer?
I think, as a matter of, I started out taking PTO just to help bridge the gap for a paycheck. So that would be the only compensation. It wasn't compensation for actively doing work. It was, we don't earn a lot in this building, still need to pay the bills. And so I cashed out a chunk of my PTO.
I just want to clarify that.
Sir, Representative Claiborne?
Thank you. Paid time off. So this was vacation time that you had earned during your normal working hours. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Representative Falconer?
Thank you.
That is correct.
Chair
Right.
Claiborne?
Thank you so much. And I just, in listening to you describe your job duties as all-encompassing, staff development, organizational, IT, organizing volunteers, would you consider your job description kind of as a nonprofit generalist?
Representative Falconer?
Yeah, I think that would be a pretty accurate description.
Chair Claiborne?
Right, thank you. And then I just want to make sure that you called this you call the boundary waters your life's passion. Would that mean that regardless of whether you had an affiliation with this organization that's being discussed, you would still be involved in protecting the boundary waters?
Representative Falconer?
Yeah, oh my goodness, yes. I can't imagine a worse place to have this sort of toxic mining. This means so much to my family. It means so much to millions of Minnesotans and people across the country. It's our way of life. It's the icon of the North. To have it imperiled, honestly, tears me up inside. And yeah, I would 100% have been involved in whatever way that I could, up to and including serving in the legislature. I mean, when I was out door knocking, it was so apparent. People would literally greet me at the door as the boundary waters guy. Like, hey, you're the boundary waters guy. One family, there was a trip, they were packing up for their own boundary waters trip. It was during the August primary GOTV time, and they said, don't worry, voted for you early. We're packing up to go in the wilderness. Thanks for being our champion. So
That's fine.
1,000% yes.
Chair Claiborne?
Thank you. And then you mentioned, I believe in your testimony, that these pieces of legislation have actually been brought forward in previous legislative sessions. Do you know who the author was of the previous Save the Boundary Waters kind of campaign?
Yeah, so,
Falconer.
oh, sorry, thank you. HF 309, which is the current incarnation, The last biennium was authored by Representative Sandra Feist, and previous to that was Representative Kelly Morrison.
Okay. Okay.
Chair Claiborne.
That's all I have for the moment right now. If I can maybe come back if I think of something else, if we
Chair
still have
Muller.
time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I heard you correctly, but just want to be sure the Save the Boundary Waters campaign has, did you say 400 members?
Representative Falconer.
Yeah, the coalition has over 400 members that ranges from organizations, associations, and business owners.
Chair Muller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you've talked a little bit about the different job descriptions and job duties you have, but have you done any lobbying for NMW since you have become a sworn legislator?
Representative Falconer.
No, I have not.
Chair Muller.
And have you ever worked as a state or federal lobbyist while you've been elected?
Representative Falconer.
No, I have not.
Chair Muller.
And then just in regards to the letter that was mentioned and submitted as an exhibit, have you ever seen or signed on to other issue letters from other legislators to members of Congress or the federal administration?
Rep Falconer.
Yes, I have. Both I have signed on them, and then there's plenty of examples on both sides of the aisle of members signing on to letters that went to Congress, including members that it would have benefited their profession.
That's all
Chair
I have.
Muller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any other question? Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few follow-up questions. One is, the boundary waters, are they solely located in the state of Minnesota?
Representative Falconer.
The boundary waters, as designated as a federal wilderness, yes, is located solely within the state of Minnesota.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair. And as your role as a legislator, that's ongoing, even though when session ends, I mean, the job doesn't stop. It keeps going, correct?
Representative Falconer.
The role of a legislator, yeah, we're a part-time so-called legislator, but I guess some members could choose to shut off their inbox and wait to gavel in January. I don't think most do, and I count myself as one of those that don't do that.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair. And as your job title of Federal Affairs Manager, within the organization, is that considered a higher level position?
Representative Falconer.
Yeah, yes, I guess it would be.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair. And finally, any reimbursement or compensation for maybe any travel you have done specifically to, some of the bills that you have carried or for the organization while you've been an elected official?
Representative Falconer.
For the bills that not for the bills that I've carried. I mean, I've traveled as a course of my job, and work reimburses me for that, but not on anything that I've carried or actively worked on in this legislature.
Representative Myers.
Thank you, Chair. And so final question. So there is some payment that is going on during your legislative time?
Oh,
Representative Falconer.
I'm sorry, if I misunderstood the previous question, I
Representative
guess
Myers.
I didn't understand it fully.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just the question of any reimbursed expenses for travel you may have done as your role with your employer that you've been reimbursed for your travel when you go around, working for that organization, why you're a legislator.
Representative Falconer.
Oh, I see. So while I'm not necessarily during session, just as a legislator. Yeah, like we ran into each other coincidentally in Omaha, and I was in Omaha doing a community presentation. We were meeting up at a brewery to talk to Omaha people that love the boundary waters, and that's an example. And we saw each other in the hotel room, or in the hotel, not in the hotel lobby.
Representative Myers.
Nope, that's all I got.
Chair Claiborne.
Thank you very much. Chair Davids, and this may be, just to clarify, you are not a lobbyist, and you are not a state lobbyist, not a federal lobbyist.
Representative Falconer,
That is correct.
Chair Claiborne.
Thank you. And any travel reimbursement would have been for community organizing. Is that what I just heard?
Representative Falconer,
Yes, community organizing, education, conferences, presentations, things like that, yeah.
Chair Claiborne.
Thank you. And then I just want to make sure that that work is, Chair Davids, I'm looking at you because I'm asking the question. That work is done not during the legislative session. I just want to make sure we're all clear that you've said you're on leave of absence while you're in the legislature. Is that correct?
Representative Falconer,
Yes, that is correct.
All right, thank you.
Chair Claiborne.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, any other questions from members? Chair Moeller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know you were asked some questions about your work when we're not in session. We still have some legislative obligations. But I know many legislators have other jobs to help pay the bill when we're not in session. And so are you aware of other legislators who work and get paid for other jobs when the legislature's not in session?
Representative Falconer.
When the legislature is not in session, yes, many. I would hazard to guess that most.
Rep. Mueller? That's it, thanks. Okay. Okay, House Rule 610 allows the Ethics Committee to recess for an executive session to consider or determine the matter of probable cause. I move a recess for an executive session. The room will be cleared other than members and staff.
And microphones turned off.
No, I just said we were going to do it. Oh, all those in, been too used to being tax chair. Yeah. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion prevails unanimously. Thank you. Thank you.